Alright, let me give you the long and short of it first. There's a book called ADHD 2.0 written by Dr. Hallowell and Dr. Ratey, and you should go buy it to find out more about this trait they call VAST, VAST. Now, I'll explain why. So back when I first started thinking, okay, I may have ADHD, need to get diagnosed, etc., etc. The first thing that I wanted to do was not simply book an assessment or something like that. The first thing I wanted to do was find out as much as I humanly possibly could about ADHD and all the research, etc., etc. Now, there is a huge amount. I don't know if you're aware of how many scientific papers, for example, there are published on ADHD every year. It's an awful lot. So it can be overwhelming, and one of the things that I mentioned before that's a bugbear for me, there's also a lot of stuff on social media which the accuracy, let's say, varies, and I don't think that helps. But one of the things that popped in my head, my original hypothesis, was that my understanding, as it kind of was at that stage, and it sort of is still now, is that ADHD, a lot of it can be explained by having a dysregulated or dysfunctional, I don't know what the difference is, but a dopamine system in your brain that isn't quite working the way that it should. Now, dopamine is the thing that gives you pleasure when you're doing something and you enjoy it, whether it's playing a game, whether it's doing exercise, whether it's listening to loud music. The dopamine is fired off in your brain. That's what makes that activity pleasurable. And obviously because it's pleasurable, then you want to do it again. And so you get that behavioral sort of reinforcement. The problem with that when it comes to addictions and things like that, and social media is such a huge issue these days. It's like the more that you do it, the less of a hit that you get from the dopamine. So for example, it's like addiction to any drug, or let's take ice cream or whatever it is. So initially you have that, remembering this TikTok of a baby that eats ice cream for the first time. And you see, puts it in its mouth, and then you see its eyes go like this, and then it grabs for the ice cream. It's actually really funny. But you know, the first time that you try something like that, and I've never done any sort of illicit drugs, but the first time you've done something like that, there's a huge spike, let's say in whatever activity it is, hopefully not illegal, a huge spike in dopamine, and you feel elated, euphoric. It's not just feeling good, it's elated, euphoric. And so what do you want to do? Your body immediately goes, well, I want to do that again, that felt great. And that's all well and good up until what starts happening. You end up with this sort of inbuilt resistance or tolerance where you need more of that substance to achieve the same high or even less. And then you have the basis of an addiction. Now, I was sort of thinking, okay, if it's a dysregulation of the dopamine system, and it's kind of like, I was thinking this yesterday, it's kind of like we've almost become dopamine junkies, right? So what we want to do is reach for the lowest hanging fruit that we know is going to give us dopamine, whether that is gaming, eating, alcohol, whatever that is. And then I was thinking, if you remember The Social Network, it's a documentary, and it showed how social media giants such as Facebook literally have software engineers whose job it is to give you hits of dopamine often enough through using their platforms to get you addicted. That's literally their job. They work out to the millisecond. How often do we need to give little Johnny a hit of dopamine to keep him on the platform? It's the same with gaming, by the way. And I spoke about gaming yesterday. So in gaming, it's like leveling up. It's like a new cosmetic or whatever it is. In social media, guess what it is? It's that like. Originally, remember back OG Facebook, what was the only interaction really? It was the like. And how many of us got quickly addicted to chasing that like? So much, if you remember, it became such a big problem that Instagram made this big announcement that they were getting rid of likes so that you were able to hide the number of likes. Because that was addicting people. They would put up posts, and if it didn't get enough likes in a certain amount of time, they would remove the post from their feed. And it just became crazy because at the end of the day, you look at this going, none of this is real. You don't even know who this is. But I thought social media, with its quick hits of dopamine, gaming, another thing that takes very little effort, gives you hits of dopamine. Another huge one, online porn. Another huge one, the prevalence of really highly processed food with a lot of sugar, a lot of salt, a lot of fat also gives you hits of dopamine. All these things that hijack, this is why they addict us, some of us. They literally hijack our dopamine system. And so I started thinking, is it any wonder why even if some of us don't have clinical ADHD, we don't have, let's say, the biological structure in the brain is not, let's say, what it's supposed to be. It's not typical. I think that's a better way of putting it. So even if we don't have that neurotypical brain, is it any wonder that so many of us are exhibiting symptoms that are very scarily ADHD-like? Because if we're addicted to dopamine, let's take the classic example. Okay, ADHD person has problems controlling focus. All right, so if you have a neurodivergent brain, there's an explanation for that. But if you're addicted to dopamine, you have a neurotypical brain, but you're addicted to dopamine, of course you're going to have problems focusing, because if something isn't immediately interesting to you, it's not going to give you any dopamine. And because you're kind of like that dopamine junkie, that's probably not an accurate way of putting it, but I found that's an useful analogy. It's an accurate analogy in my head anyway. If you're that dopamine junkie, of course you're going to have problems focusing, because you need to find the thing that's going to give you the biggest hit of dopamine right now. And you can see this with kids all the time. I've seen it coaching kids. I've seen it, having kids around, and you see like when there's a screen or when there's a phone, especially if the parents have used a phone or a tablet to sort of placate the child, you look at the speed at which that child reaches for that screen and how quickly they figure out, oh, okay, to unlock your phone, all I need is to put the phone in front of your face, because then it scans your face and it unlocks. It is unnatural, right? It is like that baby who had that first hit of the ice cream and then the eyes go like this and then it reaches for it. Or in a very unattractive way, it's like a junkie, right? You're reaching for that hit of dopamine. And so I was thinking, okay, and I asked Eliza, my ADHD friend, this question, because she's a med student. I said, if we're in a world that's hijacked our dopamine system to such an extent, what would be the behavioral differences? Like looking from the outside, not scanning their brain, but looking from the outside, how would it present differently? Someone who has clinical ADHD and someone who just has this really deeply dysregulated dopamine system thanks to social media, porn, gaming, junk food, etc., etc., etc. How would it actually look differently? And basically the answer she gave me was that it probably would look very similar. Now, this might explain to some extent why there's been an increased diagnosis rate of ADHD, perhaps. But here's the thing. I was thinking, okay, there's the clinically diagnosed ADHDers, then there must be a huge swathe of people who exhibit pretty much all the ADHD symptoms. They don't have ADHD, but their dopamine system has been hijacked by our modern society. Now, enter the book ADHD 2.0, which when I was looking to educate myself about ADHD, which is an ongoing process, it was one of the first books I locked onto. For some reason, the cover and the description and the reviews all made me go, okay, I need to read this book. I want to read this book. It's written by two medical doctors. Definitely Dr. Hallowell has ADHD. I don't know if the other one does, but he has ADHD. And so I think that adds an extra degree of authenticity to it. So, in this book, he talks about VAST, variable attention stimulus trait, I believe. I'm on my phone. I didn't prep for this. I was like, I need to talk about this, and I'm on my morning walk. In true neurodivergent style, I'm not prepped for this, but VAST. And basically, he laid out his case for VAST, and it describes perfectly what I was thinking must be the case with the amount of dopamine hijacking activities in our society. So when basically what he says VAST is like ADHD, very similar symptomology, but it's not diagnosed professionally. You simply self-diagnose as, and you know that you identify with these issues like trouble focusing, problems with procrastination, problems prioritizing, all that stuff. And you go, yep, okay, yeah, that sounds like me. Okay, I probably have VAST. Now, he goes on to say, I just looked at this, that one of the good things about VAST is that it's not just seen with a stigma, it's seen as something that can have very positive traits as well. similar to ADHD, but ADHD I think is always going to have that stigma. But one of the good things about VST is that it can come with concomitant benefits. I don't have them in front of me. I would assume, for example, the ability to hyperfocus when something catches your interest, similar to ADHD, is going to be one of them. But basically, people with VAST will exhibit incredibly similar symptomology to people with ADHD. But VAST is induced by the environment. That's the kicker. That's the end of the story. And so we're living in a society, and this was back to my original hypothesis, where there's so many things that can hijack our dopamine system. Sorry for the sweat, it's very hot, I just realized that. Very attractive. But with so many things in the environment that can hijack our dopamine system, we become exposed to that, we get addicted to that, and then hey presto, we're exhibiting so many of the same symptoms of ADHD that it's going to be very difficult for anyone outside of ourselves to look at an individual and go, no, this person has VAST, no, this person has ADHD. And look, bottom line is, it doesn't actually really matter, I think, whether you have ADHD or VAST, aside from if you want to pursue a medical intervention, because you need to be diagnosed clinically with ADHD before, at least in Australia, before they will give you the medication. But if I look at non-medical interventions, someone with ADHD and someone with VAST probably are struggling with many similar issues. And so the non-medical interventions, which anyone can try, are going to be available to people with ADHD, people with VAST, or even neurotypical people. So any sort of intervention that involves, for example, building focus is going to be helpful to anyone. And so I wanted to talk about this because I think there's a big danger that we get hooked on, do I have ADHD or not? And I've actually seen that there are some people, when they go to a psychiatrist, they get really upset if the psychiatrist doesn't diagnose them with ADHD. And it's kind of odd, because you kind of think, oh, if I went to a doctor and he didn't give me a diagnosis of cancer, I wouldn't be upset. But with ADHD, you can actually really see people giving bad reviews on things like Google because Dr. So-and-so wouldn't diagnose me with ADHD and I'm sure that I have it, which it could be the case, but it also might not be the case. I mean, this is a medical professional we're talking about. But this idea of VAST and that it's an environment-induced cousin of ADHD, I think it's really important to keep in the back of your mind, because it gives you a pathway. It doesn't give you an excuse, but it gives you a pathway forwards to understand. And that's the thing that I'm really interested in, is understanding what's causing the issues, the challenges that I have. And I want to identify those so I can obviously identify solutions to them. And if there was only, in inverted commas, only ADHD, and I didn't have ADHD, then to some extent there are certain solutions that in theory wouldn't apply to me, because it's like, well, your issues, your challenges would be explained if you have ADHD, but you don't. So now you need to look for another explanation. And I think that's really been the big thing, is when I've noticed this when I've talked to people with ADHD, heard about their challenges, heard about the way their brain works. This is why I wanted to interview people with ADHD and other neurodivergents. I very quickly identify with them, and I feel like I've met my people. And so part of me does want a diagnosis of some sort, because I feel like it would explain a lot of the issues that I have. Again, not to leave responsibility for them. They're my responsibility to deal with, but it would give me a path forwards. And that's really what I'm looking for. I think it's, number one, validation that I'm not crazy. Other people are struggling with this. Number two, there are other people out there like me. But number three, okay, your challenges, there's a reason for them. And so now we can hopefully work on a way, medical or non-medical, a way forwards to help alleviate those issues. And so reading about VAST, I gotta say, it was like, that alone makes this book, ADHD 2.0, that's what I'm talking about here, makes this book a worthwhile read, at least in my head, because it confirmed the hypothesis that I had, which is, well, there are people with clinical ADHD, but there are probably also people whose dopamine system has been hijacked by so many of these activities, such as social media, Netflix, binge watching, junk food, all of that. And we've become these dopamine junkies. And there's something to be done about that. Bring awareness to the fact that it's happening, and the awareness itself might be curative, but it explains to a lot of people. And if you're someone who thinks they have ADHD and you don't want to get diagnosed, or you've been to a psychiatrist, psychologist, and they haven't diagnosed you, doesn't mean that this issue doesn't exist. It might just be under the name of VAST rather than ADHD. So I strongly recommend that you go and get this book, read it, even if it's only that part. I will say I read the whole book. My attention sort of waned on the last part of it where he was talking more about medications, but you know, what are you going to do? At least I read the book, and I think I will do a deeper dive on covering the book and summarizing it, so that perhaps I can get more people to read it. Because I do think, and let me wrap up with this, I do think it's incredibly important to educate yourself. If you're going to go down this rabbit hole of neurodiversity, you need to educate yourself. It's much more important than if you're going into a doctor for a cancer diagnosis, a diabetes diagnosis, whatever. You know, you go there and you've got a broken arm and you say, "Doc, what's wrong with me?" Doc can see the broken arm and can fix it. Any of these mental health issues, this is not so easy to diagnose because you can't see it from the outside. And it takes an incredible amount of self-awareness on your part to help diagnose effectively. Yes, the doctor is there. Yes, the psychologist is there. Yes, the psychiatrist is there. But they cannot diagnose you, and they cannot even help you, frankly, without your input. And the more self-aware you are, and educating yourself helps with that, that's part of it. Educating yourself, making yourself more self-aware will help you get to a accurate diagnosis more quickly. And that means it'll get you on the path to a better life more quickly as well. And that's really the path I'm on at this moment. And that's really why I thought this idea of VAST is incredibly important, because it gives you a pathway forwards. If you don't want or cannot get or cannot afford, because it's expensive, that official ADHD diagnosis. So, look, at this point, you certainly won't be able to pursue the medical intervention, at least from my understanding, with VAST, because it's a self-diagnosed trait or condition. But it can give you pathways forwards that are non-medical. And I think that's just as important. Things like, okay, you guys should exercise more. As I said in yesterday's video, exercise, eat better. And I was just watching another video today, educating myself even more, but doing those things that aren't quite so dopaminergic early in the morning rather than putting them off late. The worst thing you can do is do something that's highly dopaminergic, like playing games first thing in the morning, because afterwards your dopamine is gone. So there's all this. I'm continually educating myself, but I hope that this idea of VAST, it might be a light bulb moment for you in the same way that it was for me. So let me leave it there, so you don't have to look at my sweaty face anymore. I'll try and be less sweaty tomorrow, no guarantees. It's not that hot here, but it's incredibly humid here in Sydney, Australia, so we'll see. But I hope this helps. I'll put the link, by the way, to ADHD 2.0. You can buy it from pretty much any bookstore. I'll put the Amazon link below. Highly suggest you read it, and if there's an audiobook version, if you like that, then by all means go for it. But look it up, ADHD 2.0 by Doctors Hallowell and Ratey, and find out more about VAST.